All right. Hey, Adam. Yeah, I think we met for the first time at WeWork when I was at Hyperspace over there. I loved your energy straight off the bat. How about if you tell me and the viewers, if introduce yourself?
Awesome. So, co-founder and CEO of Diligence. We are an early stage startup. We raised a small pre-seed at the end of 2022, right before the world was about to collapse financially. I'm currently running a founding team of three founders only. We have a bootstrap mentality, profitable at this point, and we are the dynamic data and intelligence company. What we do is we enhance deal making workflows with performance data about the assets you're looking at in order to help you find the best deals first, the ones that fit the most, help you follow up in due time, reduce risk in due diligence, and also manage your portfolio and assess market risks to that portfolio. Currently working with pretty much everybody interested in equity of a startup or a technology company. So government, research institutes, private equity, limited partners, growth VCs, early growth, secondary buyers, family offices, angel investors, you name it. That's a data company. It's usually broad audience. Because if you have something interesting to tell with data, a lot of people will be interested in it. So that's us in, I think, a nutshell.
That's awesome. So there are two things that pop to my mind that I'd love to ask you about. Number one, I love the bootstrap mentality, especially as someone as myself has taken interest in indie
Mhm.
hacking lately, which is starting your own micro SaaS on the side. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that mentality. I know a lot of founders out there just want to bring a deck, raise money as soon as possible, and go to the next round. And number two, you're after the VC market, which is also not something that we see often in the
Yeah. So
landscape.
I think two things really different. I can't say we started this with the dream of being a bootstrap company, but reality struck. And about, so let's say in October, we're 3 weeks pre-launching our first product. And then I was called in for reserve duty for about 3 months. And then I came back, and then the runway obviously got shorter. And I tried raising funds in earlier this year, saw there was like really preliminary conversations, saw there wasn't a lot of traction. People weren't really interested in investing in December of last year. And I decided I can either continue try and fundraise, or I can try to get customer capital, which is, in my opinion, the most lucrative customer capital. There's a big conflict happening right now in Israel, essentially a war between Hamas and Israel. And a lot of people in the workforce were called in for reserve duty. A company of three, founder sales growth. I lead all the sales and commercial aspects, and I was away from the company essentially for almost 3 months, which means the first quarter of sales that was supposed to happen essentially got postponed by a quarter. And I landed back into, I don't know, being a citizen in a market that wasn't very enthusiastic, I would say, about deploying new capital in early stage companies, and also not so much on buying new products. Um, but at the end of the day, we had to decide: either we try to get enough revenue with the runway we have, and we had about 7 months, which is a month from now, to get there, or continue trying to fundraise, and hopefully somebody will believe in our vision and will invest in the company. So we decided to hedge the risk and try and go to market. And essentially that's what we did. And I'm happy to say that was a good result. As of now, the company is default live, as they call it in VC language, and profitable. So there's no danger, but it also comes with a lot of different differentiations in how you build the company and how you focus your energy. Um, I think that when you are in a venture back mentality, you have these aspects that you're trying to achieve that will increase the valuation of the company, right? You want to land a big American customer. You want to have a super differentiated, deep tech product that nobody can copy. And that's a luxury of somebody who has like a 2 year runway and $8 million in the bank account. When you have 6 months and the clock is about to run dry, the only thing you do is, how do I get more money as fast as I can? So we did a few things that are probably non-traditional, I would say, in company building. We reached out to local customers here in Israel, Most of our customers are Israeli. We already have a few American and European customers, but that was kind of the first go-to, just because we needed speed and the ability to reach out to the customers fast and do a fast sales process. And so that's one thing. The second thing is that you cut literally every cost you can. So SaaSes you don't really need, you cut out. Even Slack, we downgraded to like the free version, and you try to save on literally every dollar. We moved out of our WeWork offices to Google for Startups, who were kind enough to provide us with a free office for now. Um, so those things are things that usually when you're managing a budget of VC-backed company, they're small items. But when you have 6 months and every dollar counts, um, you do that. Like, I mean, if you're responsible and you want to keep the company alive and not zero all the equity the investors already gave you, which in my unfortunate case, a lot of them are really good friends of mine, which I would really not like to come up to them after like 2 years of running this saying, hey guys, all the money you gave me, yeah, it's not, we burned that out. So that was kind of the main goal when I got back from reserve duty, understand the situation, is to keep the company alive. And I think we just reached this point, so that's good news for us.
Before we started the podcast, you told me that you have some war stories for me with your startup. I wasn't expecting literal
Yeah,
war
that's a real
stories.
war
So,
story. Yeah.
I think it's just amazing. On one hand, it is super tough, the grind, right? And it's not always correct. Like maybe some startups would flourish a lot more getting that initial American huge customer. But I do think something really nice that happens when you go into the fight or flight mode is that you are very, very results oriented. You're very, very focused on your goal to survive. Even if you're going through the wrong path, it helps you create that initial engine. At least that's my take on
I
it.
think it completely changes everything, right? A lot of discussions around building product is the critical path, right? Like a critical path of features you think the customers will want and will set you apart and will create the differentiation. It goes down a few notches and we're like, all right, I'm fixing this bug. I'm fixing this bug. This customer says that if we have this, is going to buy today and we're going to release it today. You don't care if it's in the critical path, right? So I think that really changes the mentality. I don't know if it's good or not. I mean, I'll learn in a few years from now. It feels good to me. My previous company, I had a services company. I used to wake up every morning, open the bank account, and usually I would have more than last month. And this is something I didn't have for the first, I'd say, 16 or 17 or 18 months in this company. And that was weird to me. I feel like my REM sleep improved since I became net positive. Um, but I guess it's sort of a kind of a mentality of a person thing. I don't know. I might be wrong. I mean, other people do it not that way and they're fine and they're very successful and they build awesome companies. For me, coming in from a company that was 7 years or 8 years straight profitable on pretty much every month, was really hard to do that switch of, all right, we got the pre-seed round and now every month we have less and less and less. Um, so I think ultimately kind of the local crisis with the geopolitics and everything happening was a positive turn of events for us because it's forced us to make me go back to my roots of being a company that generates more income than our expenses every month. And I think that's where I feel most comfortable. I don't know. That's just me.
No, I think that's a great background. And now you talked about the fact that you're managing to be
Mhm.
profitable. So how about if you tell me a little bit about that? How did that come to be?
So I think as a starting point, when you are starting something, kind of the general advice is to do to challenge, like focus on a pain point where you have access to customers or at least their insights. So I was very fortunate in my previous company. Basically, somebody paid me for 8 years to be nice to everybody, all the investors, all the founders. So I had a good access to what's happening, and I had a good reputation. I was being basically nice to everybody. I know, introducing investors and founders customers. It was just the previous role with a services company operating accelerators. So I had like this good karma, and people would take a meeting. So essentially, what I did the minute we realized we're going to be profitable is export all my LinkedIn contacts, go one by one, took me like 2 days, prioritize and reach out. And I think the beauty of it, and this is something VCs are not used to, is when you're not trying to raise money from them, you're selling to them. It's kind of a scenario they're not really familiar with. So I would reach out to a prospect investor or like a champion in that organization, and he would hop on a call and they would say no, because that's life. Sometimes investors say no, or customers say no. So the next day I would reach out to the person sitting next to him, and he might have said yes. And the week later, I would walk into their office, and like the person who said no was like, "Hey, what are you doing here?" I'm like, "I'm onboarding you as a customer, dude." And he was like, "Good for you that you didn't give up." Like they would be appreciative of it. So I feel like that's something like it's an edge, I would say, because they're not used to being buyers so much. I mean, how many VCs like buy tools, and how many tools are there for them? Um, in general, the finance industry, usually the tools they're being sold are either like basic infrastructure, let's say CRM, and some data products, which there aren't that many of them. Um, so I think that was an interesting thing. So I basically reached out to everybody, probably about 50 people in one day, and then just started following up until I catch all the Pokemon, which is kind of the goal.
So tell us about those Pokemon that you caught. I don't know which numbers you can go into, but can you talk to us a little bit about initial growth?
Yeah, so I think so the platform, we started commercializing, I would say, in Q3 of 2023. So that's literally ground zero, I would say. We already like a design partner that paid us a little bit, but that's, I would say, ground zero. So the end of Q3, I need to remember the numbers correctly. I think we were at about $15,000 ARR, right? So $1,000 monthly. And since then until today, we've been able to multiply that by twofold every consecutive quarter, which brings us to about where we are today, several hundreds of dollars ARR. I don't want to go into specifics. Again, this is telecasting for the world. But I think the story I remember the most, and this is kind of, I think, an interesting takeaway, right? When you're reviewing a challenge or a problem, specifically in a data company, which is a bit different than a software company, you reach to this point where you're saying, all right, I'm sure this is a problem. I think this is the solution. Now I need to prove it to the customer, right? Because he says he does things in a certain way, right? And it's been working for him most of his life, right? So we came up to, I wouldn't go into names, but let's say one of the top 5 funds in Israel, manages more than $2 billion. And we were like, listen, guys, we have this data. Um, Specifically, the use case was about talent flows and kind of employee workforce. And we think this would be very beneficial for you guys. And you're gaining risk. This is a huge opportunity for you to improve your outcomes. And they were like, yeah, we don't believe you. And this is kind of the turning point. After I did the research, I was like, let's do an experiment. You give me 6 companies whom you're interested in investing in one of them. Don't tell me who. And I'll tell you what I think about this sample of 6 companies, similar companies between 100 to 150 employees, raised similar funds, uh, general software stuff. And they were like, okay, here's the list. Tell us what do you think? So, and this was surprising even to me, right? This is an all or nothing like bet, right? If I don't find anything interesting, I'm done, right? I lose the customer, I lose the best design partner I potentially could have. So we looked at the list. Essentially, 5 companies were looking pretty great. All of them were growing. Different aspects seems really, really good. But then we looked at the last company. This is something that was pretty fresh, all public information. We categorized everything manually. We had no tech recently. This is before we raised money. And we came up to them after like a couple of weeks. We did everything manually. And we said, listen, guys, this is what we think is the best company. In terms of how they're growing, how they're doing things. And they were like, thumbs up. That was the company. We already invested in them, by the way. The other 4 looked pretty good with different fluctuations, different kind of ups and downs. But the 6th company, we looked at it and we said, listen, guys, this is a very scary company to invest in. Like, why? So what we were able to see from the data is that that company was losing twice as much employees every quarter than the other five, every quarter consecutively for 2 years, right? So think about it this way, right? If you in a company of, let's say, 100 people, between 2 to 5 people will leave every quarter. It's kind of the general turnover of employees. People stay in a company for 2, 3, 4, 1 years. They move on to the next challenge for whatever reasons that they have. This company was losing twice as much. So think about the cost of losing an employee above the natural turnover rate. So that's at least $50,000, right? If you need to find the employee, you need to onboard him. That takes at least 3 months if you're a really good company. And then he already starts producing and yielding actual ROI. And they're losing twice as much. So if, let's say, we're doing 100 instead of 3, they're losing 6 every quarter for 2 years straight. So at that point, we were like, listen, guys, this company is either hiring the wrong people or they can't keep them in the company. Either way, it's a culture and management problem, and it's expensive. This is something you can look into. 2 years later, I can tell you right now, the company is in extreme struggles. The CEO was kind of removed from his role quietly. And I think that's what helps me sell today the most, because I know I'm right. There's something in there. And immediately they became our first customer. Now they're one of our biggest customers. And so that's kind of, at some point, you have to kind of prove it to the customer, specifically if you have like a really exotic pain point. And I think that's the best war story I have that is successful. I have one that's also how we lost a big customer. But yeah, happy to continue where you want to go with this conversation.
Well, I do have a
All right,
million
then
questions, so I think you would need a series of podcasts.
I'm not going
But I
anywhere.
love that story. So let
I'm
me.
not going anywhere.
The
All right.
listeners are, or the viewers are. Um, so let me see if I get this right, and let's see if we can help other founders with their playbook, right? So if I get you correctly, before you actually really built a product, you said, "Hey, we can gather insights out of data in a way that other VCs are not doing today. And before we build the product, we have a way to do
Manually.
this." Next step, right. Next step is let's validate this. Let's go to VCs and see if we can give them those insights manually. Assuming we can, we will then build the product. And your go-to-market with a lot of warm
Yep.
outreach. Did I
Yep.
follow until right?
That's essentially it. I think the interesting take there is that you need to make it frictionless for them. They had to think about the 6 companies they need to give me, right? They had to like do some thinking about it, but it wasn't a lot of friction. So they gave a little, but they got a lot. And that's, I think, what converted the customer, right? If you're going to get somebody to convince him to do a new type of behavior or learn a new data set, for them, it should be some investment, not a lot. And the outcome should be overwhelmingly positive or valuable.
Got it. So after that point that you acquired that first customer who's now an advocate for you, how did you continue on this journey of growth? Was it just the same playbook for mainly outreach and it was good enough to help you double your numbers? What other things
So
did you do?
in the field of financial service providers like acquirers, VCs, private equity, where we sell to, having a customer base that is well branded is a big advantage. So the first thing I did is kind of do a search of who are the ex-employees who worked at that fund and reach out to them and if they work in current ICPs. And because they worked in that fund, I was able to get an interesting, like a relatively fast introduction into those. And then, especially putting that aside in parallel, I literally reached out to every person I was able to find that is in an ICP. So understanding our ICP, I think, was an interesting part. And in financial institutions, it's all about the management fees. Right? The challenge is that when they're paying you, it comes out of their management fees. And management fees also pay salaries. Um, it's the same budget. So I think that was a challenge. So we understood that we needed to focus on companies or firms that have at least X amount of assets under management. That's after we reached out to like 50 people, and 25 were like, we're too poor for this. Even though we can talk about whether they're actually too poor, we understood kind of where the threshold is, which is probably $300 million assets under management. And that's how we kind of started honing in on who could be a relevant customer, who could be an ICP. And next stage after that was kind of building our internal SDR platform within the company, which is very comfortable, where you have the data about your customers and you can qualify them within your existing data set with the SQL query. So that was the process. We found one, we reached out to the ones that came to mind that were similar. When we were able to lock in, let's say 2 or 3, we started thinking about how to focus the energy in a more precise manner, I would say.
So it sounds to me, first of all, like you're an excellent salesperson. I would definitely take you as an SDR, that's for sure. I think that, a lot of these things sound really obvious, but I think many people drop the ball when it comes to sales. So it's like, oh, you know what? I'm going to create on LinkedIn Sales Nav a list of all the companies across the world, and I'm going to reach out and it's going to work. What I like about your approach is the laser focus and the connection building. So you found that one customer that works. How do we spread the word? How do we multiply this success? You're very, very focused. You don't look to the left. You don't look to the right. It already worked. Let's repeat, rinse and repeat. So I think that that's a great strategy. Even though it may be obvious, at the end of the day, many people just don't do that. Maybe you need good people skills. Maybe you need a great product that actually works, and then you can do that. But I love this playbook.
Just to piggyback on what you said, I think what people miss sometimes is understanding the political capital of a prospect champion, right? So when you're reaching out to an organization to try and sell them a B2B product, you have somebody kind of championing your product. It's not always the one who has the budget approval authority. It's not always the one who's actually going to use the product. And I think for us, what we generally understood about financial services, so we talked about VC because it's kind of an easy example, but we don't only work with VC, is you need to, when you qualify the champion you want to reach out to, you need to understand whether this person is even able to do an organizational purchase. So this was a lot of wasted time for us. In the beginning, we reached out to managing partners in funds. It's not the guy or the girl to do that. And what we understood is that for us, the ICP is somebody that has enough organizational pool, which means the organization wants to conserve this employee as an employee. 2, he's done the work because our workflows are on the day-to-day stuff. And lastly, he has some macro visibility to understand why he needs this on a more organizational level. So for us, the perfect person would be probably a principal in a fund, somebody not in the junior position, so kind of the mid-year position, who's been within the organization for at least 2 years. So he's fully trained. He knows what he's doing. They want to conserve him. If he comes up and asks for a budget, they will say yes. And lastly, somebody that has led an investment or is a board observer. So we kind of understand the more macro overview of a company. So that's kind of the ICP that usually works for us pretty well. Then the challenging part is understanding who of them in the prospect organization likes data, wants to try new tools, et cetera, et cetera. At this point, I'm able to come up to one of these champions and say, listen, all the people who kind of used our software and did the process to put them into the organization got a lot of social credit for that, or organizational credit for that. I wouldn't say somebody got promoted because they put in our software to play in their organization, but if they were to interview for a new job, and this is something I asked them, they would for sure tell how they embedded diligence in their previous organization, which for me is incredible. So if you're able to position your software solution and the process the champion does with you as something that will gain him political or professional credit within this organization or the next one he tries to apply to, I think that's a strong leverage. That really motivates champions, um, alongside a few other things that we can talk about if you're interested in. But that's my memory of it.
So the last point that you made is exactly what I wanted to talk about is when you talk about an ICP, understanding their motivation and their KPI can be very powerful and also influence your whole go-to-market and your messaging, right? So if you know that you can help them get, I don't know what they need, more intros or more deals or more, I don't know what, and you help them reach that goal, then suddenly the sale becomes a lot easier compared to just guessing in the dark and say, hey, we have great data for you.
So I think that's easier said than done. Most buyers usually, so let's say they have 5 motivations, all of them have that. You know them. The weighting in different prospects is different, right? For some people, they just want to work with us because they're data geeks and they want to try out new things. And that's what gets them going. For other people, it's that promotion. I want to be a general partner or a managing partner one day, and this is a good badge to have. For other people, is exactly that. I'll use the platform to meet my KPIs more easily, and maybe when they're at the beach. Uh, some of them are really like the motivations might be really small. Like I work with this tool, I really hate the UI. Your UI is nicer. I want to work with this because when I wake up in the morning, I like looking at pretty things. And I think the most challenging part is really understanding out of the 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 motivations that a prospect champion has, which one has the highest weight. And you need to do that within a 30-minute demo. Um, and that's challenging. And as time progresses, you kind of get that better, I think. Um, but that's, in my opinion, the hardest part. And I don't think this is spoken enough about, right? When you hop on a call with the champion, there are at least 5 or 6 or 7 different trigger points to kind of hit the hammer with in order to get him to do the process. But understanding really what really hurts him out of those 5 or 6, after you map them, and mapping them is hard, but let's say you have that ready, understanding which ones you need to press on within a Zoom meeting, it's challenging, man. That's the hardest part, I would say, in my sales processes today.
I like that. So to wrap up, what would you tell other founders that are just starting out or trying to get their first customers?
I'm going to be very humble on this one, but I think for me, it's hard to, like, a lot of people raise money and then do sales. For me, specifically in my personality traits, it's really hard. If I'm able to sell to a customer, I know it's valuable. When you're raising capital, you're selling equity or a dream or a vision, which is fine. But I think that once I started doing sales and I got into this volume, selling the vision became a lot easier, right? And I saw this is one of your previous episodes as well. So Gilad said that like a few people paid him $200 for a product he might build one day. I think that's a healthier approach, if you ask me, to sleep at night. And sleeping is really important when you're a co-founder and CEO of a company. So I think making sales, even if you don't have anything, or doing it once, really scrappy, really manual, fake, whatever, will help you fundraise if that's your strategy, because you'll know this is something that helps users, even if it's one. Obviously, this advice doesn't apply to every case. Sometimes some products are really deep tech, requires 4 or 5 years or hundreds of hours or thousands of hours of development. But if you're in my category where you can do that and kind of create something either manually, a report, or something really scrappy, really fast, do it before you fundraise, because you will have, when you fundraise and they know you're selling something that works, they feel it, right? They know you got this because you know you got this because you were able to make a sale. So I think that's my main takeaway. But again, not everybody can utilize it, I think.
Makes sense. Thanks
Sure
so
thing.
much, Adam. It was a lot of fun for me. How can people find you and
We're at
Diligence?
diligence.vc or Adam Lazovski on LinkedIn. We have a newsletter. We have a free tool. You can use it. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to pay if you want to just use the free version. Provides a lot of value for founders, for investors, for industry players of all types. Service providers even use our tool. So even people looking for a job ping me sometimes and use my tool to find out whether a company might be hiring somebody in their role or department. So feel free to reach out. Happy to help anybody that's in need. All
Thanks so
right.
much, Adam.